Hi, this is Brent, and I wanted to mention a few stand-up dates that I have coming up. If you're interested in seeing that kind of thing, January 24th, that's a Saturday. I'll be at Cobb's Comedy Club in San Francisco with Moshe Kasher. We'll be co-hosting our Smug Shift show with a lineup of comedians on that include Todd Barry, Marie Faustin, Brittany Carney, and Ellen Cleghorn. So I think it's a 9:30 or 9:45 show, I think, and that's part of SF Sketchfest. So check out sfsketchfest.com for more details about that. On February 4th, I'll be at the Improv Comedy Club in Brea, California. Okay, and then on February 5th, I'll be at the Ojai Playhouse in Ojai, California with Neil Hamburger and Mikey Campman and Angie Stroud. So, just look these places up and my name, and you'll find more information about that. And also on February 25th, I'll be at the Improv Comedy Club in Hollywood, California. This is the Improv on Melrose, and I'll be doing, my own show there, February 25th. And I haven't asked anybody to do it yet, but it'll be some friends of mine and stuff that are on the show. So check all that stuff out, and just Google search it, and you'll get the info that you need and the tickets that you need. And I think that's it. And now let's start the show. Welcome to the Brent Weinbach podcast. My name is Brent Weinbach, and I'm here with spoken word artist and filmmaker Jamie Dewolf. Hi.
Hello.
Thanks for
Hello.
Thanks for being here. Jamie is I know Jamie from a long time ago, I guess at this point. I think I met you over 20 years ago, maybe 22 years ago or something. 23 years ago, maybe, actually. Jamie, this show is still going on, but it's under a different name now, right?
Yep.
He's been hosting a long time, probably the biggest show in Oakland, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was called Tourette's Without Regrets. That's what it was called when I met you. And now it's called Ruckus Revival, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a celebration of all forms of spoken word, be it poetry, rap, stand-up comedy, and that's and I used to do stand-up comedy on your show, and it became such a huge thing. It was just everybody would go. Is it monthly? Is that what it is?
Yep, that's monthly. And it also incorporates a lot of circus performance, burlesque, aerial, contortionist, fire, on and on. So it started in 1998 when I started as a one-off, and then it became a series after that. And then as I started doing a lot more circus performances and hybrids, and a lot of my circus performance friends and burlesque friends and so forth started interweaving throughout the show. And so it's a big three-ring circus. It still has all of these elements. I would say that when you started doing it, it's probably more like 70% verbal everything.
Yeah.
With lots of sprinkling of mayhem and madness and weird contests and music and so forth. And then now I think it's very evenly balanced in terms of everything that kind of switches to back and forth. We call it short attention span theater sometimes as a joke, but that it's constantly changing and evolving throughout the night. So you just see every kind of performance.
The crowd grew. I mean, this became such a huge show. What was the max? I mean, what were the biggest crowds you had at your show?
Probably like 1,000, 1,500, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
It was pretty great for a show on Thursday nights that was completely independent. So We never had any kind of backing, any kind of corporate anything, any kind of clear channel or club behind us. So it was
And
all very, very gritty
I
underground.
feel like when I first started doing it, it was not even, there wasn't even really, people weren't really promoting things on the internet even, so it was just
No,
really kind of a word of mouth thing or something. And
right.
maybe flyers and stuff, I guess.
Yeah. Flyers and posters all taped up around
I
town,
mean,
punk rock.
maybe some maybe some, Guardian write up or something like that, but,
Sure. And now
um,
we're in the flip side where it feels like every newspaper has crawled to extinction and now everything is just a barrage of internet where you can't find anything. It's bizarre.
how come you changed the name?
So we changed. I've actually been wanting to change the name for a while, partly because it wasn't reflecting what the show was anymore. And that was really clear when we would take the show on tour. Because to people in the Bay Area, they knew what Tourette's Without Regrets was, they knew what that meant. And it's had its own kind of reputation and so forth. But when we would take it to festivals and things like that, it was quite obvious when you put Tourette's Without Regrets in between all these different other kind of variety shows. It just sounded like 3 hours of people screaming at each other. And that was not defining what the show was. I mean,
Mhm.
certainly when it started, it had much more of a kind of a punk rock subversive twist on any kind of a slam comedy freestyle open mic element, but everything was competitive, judged by the audience, very interactive and so forth. But as it really is much more of like a deranged kind of circus celebrating all these different kinds of art forms. And so I just felt the name was limiting it over time, where it wasn't like a perfect encapsulation of it. And also when the pandemic hit, I don't know, is this even gonna ever come back again? Is it ever gonna live on in Oakland if we're gonna make it live on throughout the world or whatever else? It was a name that I'd come up with when I was 21 years old, and I've been writing on it for a while,
Mhm.
and hadn't exactly aged well. And I just felt it was limiting it. It wasn't fully explaining what the show was. And no, the Ruckus Survival is not going to have the same sort of bite as that same name. Doesn't sound as cool and so forth. I had to just take it on the chin and just shrug. But I
Why,
also was just
why
start to
did,
flinch a little.
how did you come up
No
with
Ruckus.
Tourette's Without Regrets when you were 21, or why did, what did that
I mean,
come from?
it started actually as sort of a joke, a kind of confrontational joke. I mean, I kept getting kicked out of all these different open mics that were in my hometown and anywhere I could get to on a bus line. And that was actually how the show started, and started as Tourette's Without Regrets, because I thought I kept going to these different shows, and I was also finding other performers as well who are having the same kind of feeling. We go to like a so-called open mic, but then they didn't want comedy, or they didn't want rap, or they didn't want the kind of poems that we were doing, or they didn't want the content that you were doing. And so they would sort of gently or not so gently ask you not to come back. And so it made me feel that open mics weren't really open, that essentially they were kind of these safe, sedate little, I used to call them little tea parties.
Wait, were
And
these
that,
poetry open mics?
yeah, poetry open mics, some fair amount of them, but some of them were hybrid with poetry, music, comedy.
Hmm.
And I'm sure you know a lot of those. Like there are some open mics, and then you go to them and you realize it's predominantly acoustic singer songwriters.
Hmm.
Maybe there's a few poets. There's other ones that are comedy open mics, and maybe some poets will get thrown into it, or some musicians. And so, but I put on a show that celebrated all those different kinds of performance that I felt just didn't have a place. So that was why I called it
Why
Tourette's
were
Without
you getting
Regret.
banned? I mean,
I mean, a lot of it, I was incredibly confrontational with the writing itself, not off stage. It wasn't fighting people or something, but it was the content itself. I was writing, I was leaving Christianity and grown up pretty fanatically religious. So there was a lot of pieces I had that were confronting Christianity, God, Judeo-Christian sort of systems that we all still live under, wrestling with sexuality, sadomasochism, violence. I was just writing about dark shit. My capacity and range for writing about hardcore subjects was way further than what any of them were even interested in hearing about. And when I went to slams, I realized that was not the case. And I think a lot of it was that slams had a 3 minute and 10-second time limit. One, that you also had an immediate connection to the audience where you saw actual scores. So I completely switched from being the path that I was on, which I could have been your average narcissistically self-indulgent, deranged writer who just uses every open mic to just vomit for 10 minutes. And Slam said, all right, you can do whatever you want, but you got 3 minutes. So make it snappy and then get the fuck off stage. But you see an immediate reaction to what you're doing with the numbers and the scores from the judges, which are picked randomly from the audience. So you actually have a visceral accounting on the impact of your art, which some artists, of course, loathe, but actually helped me quite a bit because I realized you can talk about a whole range of subjects, which is great. But I mean, if you're getting in your own way, if you're just yelling every single line, which is what I started as, no one's going to hear anything past 30 seconds, etc. That if you're going to talk about difficult subjects, there's a way to kind of come in and do that. And so that was a real learning journey
Were you
on its
writing
way.
poetry in high school and
I
junior
was,
high?
yeah. Yeah, I was writing a lot. I mean, I was writing kind of everything. I was writing films, plays, poems, and stories. And poems are actually really just a creative outlet for emotional exorcism. And I think that's also why my first works were so bad.
Well,
Why most people's poems are so bad
I mean,
because
what made you think you wanted to do poetry? I mean, I don't know, when you were younger, when you were a teenager, were you?
I mean, I always loved lyricists. I was always inspired by many different kinds of writers, but that I think being a kid, it was very much sort of the arty theater prototype and
Oh,
archetype in high school. And my brother was much more of the jock, and I was the weirdo mutant and doing arts. But I realized in theater, I felt that I was just a vessel for some dead man's words, often a dead white man's words, and that you're a puppet from beyond the grave. You can't change any words. That's the rules of theater. But with poems, lyrics, stories, that you're able to tell your own story. And I think what drew me also as well to the world of poetry, especially at that time, was that it was very confessional. It was very personal. It was incredibly vulnerable in a way that other art forms just weren't doing that for me at the time. And even rap there, I had heard a lot of rap, for instance, or hip hop that was very vulnerable. So I knew that that wasn't exciting to me of just endless boasts of how fucking amazing you are and how you're the best ever. And that wasn't as interesting to me. So I was really inspired early on by monologuists, people like Eric Bogosian, who did a lot of one man shows. That was really pivotal to me of like embodying these different characters
and
and
and Rod
doing these.
McEwen probably. No, I'm just kidding.
Um,
I'm kidding.
but a lot of those sort of early kind of deranged theatrical hybrids were super interesting and intriguing to me. And a lot of this kind of, I mean, I was in this weird wasteland of also not trying to figure out what it was I was trying to do.
Where were you?
But
Where were you growing up?
I was in Benicia, Vallejo in the
Yeah,
Bay Area.
that's what I
So
thought. Yeah,
yeah.
and
And
how did you even find out about Eric Bogosian and whoever else you were?
a lot of it was I had a couple teachers that sort of nodded me towards that direction. So they saw that I just had a real edge to a lot of my writing, whether it was when I was writing fiction, a lot of it would lead towards horror or the macabre or incredibly personal and vulnerable. And so they were kind of showing me works by different artists. And like I had a drama teacher that showed me Eric Bogosian, and that really connected with me in terms of he had an amazing. I've seen him live also, and he's incredible. And if people aren't familiar with Eric Bogosian, he is an actor. He's in various movies as well, but he came to prominence in New York as a monologuist. So you would go to see a one man show, but he would be doing maybe 8, different characters, and each one of them are a monologue as a character that he's writing from their perspective. So it might be a sociopathic businessman, and then that's for 5 minutes. There's a story in it. He's talking to the audience, almost the internal thoughts or a rant or a riff from this character's perspective. And then maybe he switches to a man who's half a day away from being institutionalized, yelling on a street corner, and then it switches to a burnt out hippie who still believes that pacifism is the answer. So you're sort of showing the fractured American psyche through all these different POVs and perspectives. But a lot of them were incredibly brazen in terms of taking on ugly ideas. And so I think that that also drew me to it as well. I was drawn to a lot of anti-hero art because having a face like mine and a family history like mine and coming out of Christianity, I realized I just didn't want to be hypocritical and I didn't want to be masquerading as a hero in art. I feel like a lot of artists these days try to do that, where they're sort of patting themselves on the back, and a lot of their art is essentially the moral of the story is that they're a good person and should be celebrated and so forth. And I was really interested in things that seemed to be more brutally honest and were taking a harsher appraisal. And so poets like Charles Bukowski, who was incredibly ugly and really writing for the gutter, and theatrical artists like Bogosian who were taking on really ugly characters. They were all sort of malevolent in their own way and sort of showing a different prism of it. So, I mean, that was a lot of that was all kind of feeding and informing, but I was also I was on a path to being a filmmaker because that to me synthesized all these different art forms together. And then I ended up discovering slams, started Tourette's Without Regrets, and that incorporated all these different art forms, but it did it live in a similar way that film does. So instead of
I kind of had
directing, yeah.
a similar experience in a way, is that I wanted to be involved with film more and do filmmaking stuff.
Mhm.
And then I found doing stand-up comedy was really similar to filmmaking in a way, in that, I mean, I guess it was more like theater, I guess, but writing the material was like writing the script, and then performing
Mhm.
it was kind of the way you directed it.
Mhm.
And there wasn't any long pre-production process or anything, or any
Right,
production process
right.
at all. You could write the stuff and perform it that night at an open mic,
Immediately.
and you
Yeah,
could get
immediately.
immediate feedback too. It was
Hmm.
just it was just, so there was kind of like a more pure kind of process in a way, in that or
Yeah.
immediate. I guess it was just immediate.
Yeah, no, it's exactly. I mean, that's still the case because my day job is filmmaker and I'm still a performer and still put on live shows. And I've had to come to peace to the fact that I will probably be addicted to live performance until my dying day. Because yes, you can have an idea and then literally that night you can be giving it to an audience and just completely swaying a room, inspiring a room, confessing to a room, and there's no barriers. And I think that that was incredibly seductive because then when it comes to making movies, everything costs money and it takes a shitload of time, a lot of planning, lots of people, lots of crew. And that was incredibly exciting. The fact that you could strip all that away. It's the same with theater. I also do a lot of full productions as well, where I write shows and I'm in shows and so forth, but it's months, right, to get this thing
Yeah.
anywhere close to what you want. And as I think a lot of solo performers, whether they're poets, rappers, comedians, monologists, that kind of things, that once they've discovered that shit, that's it. I can simply come up with this whole thing and create it on stage. And you and I know that we've seen many different performers where they pretty much are doing a full scene by themselves. They're doing a whole short story by themselves, or things that I've seen you do back in the day where you're essentially are doing a one person show
Hmm.
and you could go on for a half hour, 45 minutes. And it's a lot of times in things that I've seen you do, for instance, very inventive. It's not just joke, 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 is that you're doing whole scenes, stories, structure, character, you're switching in and out. We've seen other performers who are also even that on steroids, like Will Frankens of the world and so forth, where you literally feel like you're watching a movie. But removing that barrier, I think also is incredible because you don't have anybody waiting on approving you for money or crew or all of the other elements that it takes to make a movie.
Now, so when you early on, you weren't influenced by rap at all or hip hop.
No, I was, and
Yeah.
I think that that also impacted a lot of the poetry. I was probably more influenced by comedy, theater, and rap than I was a lot of contemporary poetry. I wasn't that excited by pure abstraction. I wasn't excited by anything that was a barrier to the audience. I still love wordplay. I love lyricism. I love anything clever. And I felt even then that it was like hip hop artists and rappers in particular were really the true poets of the age, and that a lot of the world of poetry, even when I say the world of poetry, most people just sort of, yeah, they act as if they respect it, but it's made itself into this profoundly safe art form that is no danger, no bite. It's not shaking anything. It's not influencing anything. It's like in this weird sanctified realm. And I think that's really unfortunate because I think that that wasn't its intent. And there was a lot of poets back in the day that had that far more seismic impact. And I think at this point, rap has really taken the mantle of that. Most kids, when I teach writing workshops at schools and so forth, I mean, there are songs that are going to be so pivotal to a lot of these youth in ways that poems never will be. And because poems are just they become too safe, too sedate, and they're just sort of cute. They're like something their grandma liked, but they're not hitting the way that a lot of the lyricists do these days. So
Um, Now, when you were doing poetry slams early on, did you just think poetry slams were really cool the whole time, or did you think a lot of stuff was kind of corny at poetry slams, and you wanted to do it your way, or what? I mean, yeah.
oh, I mean, a lot of it is still corny and still terrible. And I don't do a fair amount of slams at all these days. Slams to me were what was especially was also the time that I came in as well, which was 1998.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of different worlds that were converging at that time. So some people forget that at Lollapalooza had a whole spoken word tent that actually traveled with Lollapalooza. So there was this era in the late 90s in particular where spoken word and slams was also a really awesome synthesis of all these different writers and performers who weren't quite fitting in or weren't that excited about just doing and staying in one lane. So that was also when Henry Rollins was also doing a lot of, he had an MTV Unplugged show. So a lot of those kinds of New York spoken word styles, those are ones in particular that were really influencing me, probably more than anything else. Like I felt more influenced by the spoken word that I was seeing than I was by written poetry. I obviously love a fair amount of written poetry, but also I love all kinds of writing, right? Hard-boiled writing and noir and nonfiction and et cetera. So those are all part of the mix. But in the 90s, you had people who were coming from the worlds of punk and goth and different kinds of singer songwriters, lyricists. You had people who were comedians, but also wanted to do something different, or they wanted to be more vulnerable, or they wanted to do something that didn't have to have jokes every 30 seconds. You had poets that weren't wanting to fit into the academic kind of college world. You had a lot of these sort of renegade theater monologuists. And so a lot of that was colliding, especially during that time. And it was different that you had a format. So you had a 3 minute and 10-second deal. You had teams and you could win yourself onto this team. And then those teams would go to the national slam where teams from all over the world would battle. And that would be several days of battle and that lead to a finals and et cetera. But what that meant though, and from my experience, is that I was someone from Vallejo, ended up getting on the Oakland Slam team. And Then we went to Chicago. We battled all these other teams and met these incredible range of artists and performers. And so all of a sudden my head exploded because I was seeing these different lyricists and comedians, artists, rappers, poets, writers, short story writers from all over the world, all converging on this city, and et cetera. So that was actually the most exhilarating factor of it. And I think with any art form, there's always going to be the mediocre majority of it,
Yeah.
right? Same with comedy, same with
Stand up,
rap,
yeah,
same with
easily, yeah.
whatever. And I think with poem, the world of spoken word, probably what a lot of people think of when you even say the word poet, they think of long, pretentious kind of intonations, these sort of self-indulgent, or they think of beats, or they think of a lot of things that aren't really accurate towards what a good slam performance poet would be. And I often explain to it is that if they haven't been to a good slam is or seen a good performance poet from that time, is that these performance poets would have 3 minutes and 10 seconds to completely change a room. And they might have just gone after someone else who had some thunderous piece that was about something incredibly dark or the prison industrial system, but they're writing from the POV of an abusive guard or something that's incredibly vivid and visceral and dark. And then you're going to go up and you're going to do something hilarious and funny. And you need to be able to hit the ground running. There's no warm up. There's no, hey, how you doing? It's none of that. You have 3 minutes and 10 seconds and you're representing your team, your city, or whatever. Everybody on your team is completely different styles. And so it really teaches you a different kind of a performance on being able to smash and run right away. And I've just seen some of the most incredible performers in that era. But it's also human nature. There's things over time that can start to rise and ebb and fall because when you get to try and win over judges, i.e., random audience members, you start to get into the human psychology of how do you win over a room. And so the easy things, you say things that everybody agrees with, right? That's how you win over the room. And that to me is not as interesting artistically, because you're really just using manipulative tactics to get scores.
Oh, did you ever kind
So
of,
that could be a
in some
factor.
ways, did you ever kind of, in some ways, throw battles because you didn't want to, say anything that was just too obvious or, kind of, you didn't, want
Yeah,
to
I
say
mean,
something that didn't felt important to you to
genuine.
just win over the crowd or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was inherently by that time, if you're getting on a slam team, you sort of would know. You're like, okay, these pieces do well because
Yeah.
of this and this potential reason. This piece is probably not going to do as well because maybe it's quiet, it's vulnerable, or it's just too fucking dark. It's just, I mean, my friend Rupert, who I toured with for quite quite some time. He's a member of the Suicide Kings, and he grew up in the Philippines. He had this incredible piece called Confession, and it was talking about how on the 4th of July, I think you met Rupert back in the day.
I think,
Um,
yeah, I mean, I think I met those, yeah,
yeah,
the group that
Suicide
you were in,
Kings.
the Suicide
Yep,
Kings, yeah.
yep. But he grew up in the Philippines, and the piece starts with him and being in Vallejo on the 4th of July, watching fireworks explode, and they're eating barbecue and hot dogs and so forth. And he thinks back to when he was a child in the Philippines and he was starving, and they didn't have any food, and his father told him to go find some food and gave him a knife and a brick and said, do what you have to do. And
Hmm.
that Rupert went out and found a starving dog and then killed this dog and then dragged it home and they ate it
Wow.
to survive. And he's reflecting on that as he's coming back to now being in America, and this whole idea of this cultural, like, oh, you people eat dogs. And he's like, yeah, I actually ate a dog, not out of some cultural stereotype because I was fucking starving. And it was this amazing visceral piece, but holy shit, it was dark.
Yeah.
So you could do a piece like that and you don't know if that's going to score well. How do people feel about, oh, I love this, I'm going to give it a good score. So sometimes it's about just saying what you feel needs to be said or doing the art that you want to go out on your shield for. And so yes, absolutely. I think there's also trends. There's also the way things go. Now I haven't been to a lot of slams these days, probably because everyone's reading off their phones, and
Oh, really?
I fucking hate it
Nobody's
so
memorizing
much.
their stuff anymore?
I hate it so much. No, some people memorize their stuff, but instead of simply reading off a draft, right? They're all standing there reading off their phone, and I hate it so much. It's just the theatricality of it is so poisonous to me. It's just
Sure.
people are rooted just doing this. Everything looks like a Apple commercial, but I digress. Everybody who performs at Ruckus knows my loathing of it, so they'll
Oh, so if people pull out a
print out
phone to read
pages.
from, you'll
They know I'm
get
gonna
on that.
catch shit. They know
Yeah.
they're gonna catch shit from me. It's
Um,
like we're not doing Nokia commercials. Come on.
okay, it's just to take a turn here. Now,
Sure.
again, you're probably sick of talking about this, right? Or maybe you're not. Maybe you like talking about it still. But you, you are the great grandson of L. Ron Hubbard,
Right.
the creator of Scientology, and
Yeah.
you've been a outspoken person about, against Scientology. And
hmm
is that something? First of all, is that something you're sick of talking about?
Depends on the questions. I'm happy to talk about it with you. I think the thing that I don't enjoy is when some media entity or current affair or some shit like the Inside Edition or whatever,
Current
they
affair.
want you they want to yeah, they want to do an interview with you for an hour and a half and take half your day, and then they're going to use 30 seconds about Tom Cruise. And even when you're trying to state, okay, Tom Cruise is not significant, this is what's significant, they're like, okay, let's just talk about celebrities. That's when you're like, okay, this is a fucking waste of time.
Yeah.
And
Oh
like
yeah,
you
yeah.
could have, got anybody else. No, I'm always happy to talk about it because I think that it's important to talk about, and it's the fact that I am walking genetic evidence that what L. Ron Hubbard presented to the world is a lie and is a complete masquerade. But what's integral to that story, the entire foundation of Scientology is built on the lies of L. Ron Hubbard about who he was and what he did in his life. I think that's very fundamental to understand because you can get lost in the labyrinth on what do they believe, the various OT levels, all that. Happy to explain those, but you can get lost in all this labyrinth and minutia, and that's the point. The point of it is to be confusing, to warp your mind. It is a whole very complicated and very well engineered system of brainwashing and breaking you down and making you succumb to the will and dominating your mind and wallet. However, all of that is stemmed from the thesis statement of L. Ron Hubbard is one of the greatest men who's ever lived because he was a nuclear physicist, a war hero, this incredible world explorer. He had all of these scientific discoveries, etc. But when you simply take away his labyrinth and you just look at who he was, all of that completely falls apart. And when you realize he was not a nuclear physicist, he was not a war hero, he was not a good family man, all of this shit was lies. His evidence is lies. His case studies are lies. Then all of it completely falls apart and is dismantled, and you're not going to buy any of this so-called science that he's selling you. That's why it's so essential to talk about.
Now, is there a part of is there an aspect of him that you admire as a creative person yourself, as a creative writer yourself? Are you is there something about him that you admire and think, hey, that's actually I kind of see where the lineage comes into play is that he had this kind of creative mind to create this I guess this religion and create and well I don't know if you've read his science fiction books but
I have actually. When I was a kid, I actually read him, and he was very inspiring in terms of as a model of just being a successful writer and so forth. There's many things I do admire. I mean, one, he was profoundly prolific, and even Scientology will brag on that endlessly. The man was a locomotive when it came to writing, just the amount that he would churn out. So before he created a religion, he was legendary even in his sci-fi genre days. I mean, he was writing more than sci-fi. He was writing westerns. He was adventure story,
You
anything
think you
really.
like his books? You like
No,
his
not
fiction?
necessarily. I think that there's a lot that you can learn about him psychologically, especially Mission Earth books in particular, because and Battlefield Earth, because he wrote those at the pinnacle of Scientology near the end of his life. So there's a lot of his psychology, his views on the world warped and into those narratives. I think there's a lot to be learned there. But early on, I mean, I certainly enjoy his audacity, his energy, his insane enthusiasm. And even in those days, the golden era of sci-fi, that you're kicking around with Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein and these incredible writers. And there was a line I always remembered that they would sit around these dining room tables and everyone's telling these tall tales. And they said that the difference was with Elron is that he was the only one of these writers and authors and imaginists, essentially, who would try to convince you that all of his stories were true, right? So they would tell these fantastical tales about explorers, adventurers, and the Far East and pirates on the high seas. And Elrond would tell you all of these stories and say, "No, I did that. I saw that. I was there." And they go, "All right, all right." You know, some of them would actually famously, this guy he took notes while Elrond was just going off to all of these people at a dinner. And this guy's kind of, you know, taking notes. Okay, this is how many years you said did this, how many
Uh
years you
huh.
said did this. And so then at the end of this whole long, insane story, this guy confronted him and he said, "All right, Mr. Elrond, so according to this, you were in the military for this many years. You were on the sea this many years. You went to the Far East this many years. According to this, you'd be 89 years old." And he said it was the most livid he had ever seen Elrond get, that he was just exploded. I mean, what I think Elrond, if you even really simplify down what Scientology was to him in a way, is that this guy was a story machine. His brain was endlessly just thriving on telling these fabulous stories. And even with Scientology, he created a way where there's no end to the stories. Your life has no end, that you've gone back trillions of years and you're going to sit there and hold your little juice cans and be electrified in hypnosis, where at its base level, you're essentially doing past life regression therapy, but you're doing it with all of your past incarnated alien lives. But what that means for someone like Elron is that he can just riff endlessly. Oh, I did this. I was a race car driver on this galactic, you know, roadway on this planet in this galaxy, and I blew up in a fiery crash. And I was a emperor of this planet, and I completely dominated and I murdered all the natives. Or you just endlessly churn out stories. So he was just a story machine, and that was incredible when he was just working on stories. And my God, how the world would have benefited if that simply was the case, where if he just kept churning out books, because he was so obscenely prolific. I mean, there's stories when publishers would simply come in the morning and they just tell him what the deadline was. He's like, well, okay, well, what's the genre? And they said, well, we need a Western. He says, how many words? They say, oh, well, this. When you thinking? He's like, all right, just hold on. And they would stay in the lobby and he'd go upstairs and just pound it out. And he just would be ripping through pages. So even when he was doing his cult, is that was his main superpower, was the just endless amounts of pages, directives and handbooks and rules, and just the endless minutia of Scientology. And it's just a profound, just this guy was just hammering
So
his words into the world forever.
now when you said you were raised Christian,
Yeah, fanatically
so
Christian.
oh yeah, I mean,
Devout.
so
They would call it devout, but I would argue fanatically.
your parents obviously kind of broke from, or yeah, or whatever parent
Yeah,
was related to
right. So there's L.
who
Ron
broke
Hubbard.
from Elron, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that's a pretty essential story also, is that there's L. Ron Hubbard. His first child was his first son, who was L. Ron Hubbard Jr. L. Ron Hubbard Jr. was also my grandfather, and his first child was my mom. So my mom was born to L. Ron Hubbard Jr., and her entire life, her father was going back and forth with his father, and they're always in the shadow of this cult that was stalking them. My grandfather also was his dad's right hand man and his enforcer, especially in the early days. His name, both their names are literally on the incorporation papers giving birth to Scientology itself. So he was there at the exact point zero. He was there at the ground zero of all of it and the origin of the entire everything.
Did
But
you
also, he saw a
did
different side of his father, and then he was presenting to the world.
did you know your grandfather?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. Yeah, no, very well.
So how did
So
okay? So
that
how did the
that was a
break happen?
lot of
Yeah.
it. It's that. Yeah, so that was a lot. Well, I mean, it was a whole life war between these two men. So Junior, just for sake, I'll call him Junior for simplicity's sake. Father and son essentially constructed this cult themselves. Junior was his enforcer, right hand man. He was also quite young. He was maybe 18, 21 when he was really in his father's shadow. Had a family on his own, and him and his father had a falling out. Then, as the cult became more and more malignant and more powerful, territorial, dominating many aspects of its worldview and getting investigated in all these different levels, just the scope of it exploding. Then Junior also became essential in terms of giving people information against his father. So essentially, they were locked in this battle against each other for
Oh,
almost their
it's
entire
but it
life.
started because of this falling out, and
Yeah.
that led to him. So he kind of went against Scientology, the
Oh
junior.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
he helped create Scientology as one of its very first auditors, but he also very early on knew what it was about, saw a different side of his father. His father indoctrinated him into a lot of his personal, actual beliefs behind closed doors. He saw a completely different man behind the curtain. And so that also made him incredibly dangerous to his father.
Yeah.
So there was a real tension, a real war. So, I mean, my mom grew up in this war and being stalked by Scientology agents for her entire life, getting followed to school, followed by cars constantly, threats, all of it. And Junior was involved in huge court cases and pivotal cases and went public and media. So they had a very, very dangerous battle that
Do you know?
essentially consumed them both.
Do you know what the original falling out was for, or
Yeah.
because?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of factors. I mean, one of them was kind of hilariously money,
Hmm.
because good old cult leaders don't share it, you know? So everything goes up. Everything goes up in the pyramid. Everything in the cult, they say, oh, yeah, sure, we're making this together. We're in this together. We're all going to share. And so when Junior started having a family of his own, then he's like, I can't survive off this shit. And dad's like, well, you need to believe harder, or you're a traitor, you're betraying me, so forth. And so that was certainly a big part of it. I mean, every cult, they just burn you out. Nobody can make money except for the people at the top. But that's how cults start, is they have to justify why you're not making money, why they're using you for essentially slave labor. And that's where you have to get into all the mechanistic brainwashing. But that wasn't working on Junior because Junior knew who his dad was. He knew what they were doing. He was very honest about what we're doing. It's like, okay, we're breaking people's. He said that we were mind fuckers incorporated. He basically saw that they were a father and son team. Obviously, there are other people involved as well, but that they were basically raping people's minds for money. And he knew what they were doing. He had no illusions about it. Also, a huge breaking point was that Elron was furious that Junior would not indoctrinate his children into Scientology. And Junior was like, fuck no, I'm not doing that. It's like, I know what we're doing. What are you talking about? I'm not going to raise my kid in this shit.
Did
And his dad was like, you have to do this. This is a bad look. It's like, yeah, but I'm not going to brainwash my own children.
so he Junior was very conscious of everything. Do you think that L. Ron Hubbard Senior was? Do you think he believed his stuff at a certain point,
Mm,
or or do you think he was
yeah.
calculated about it and was aware of what he was doing?
I mean, that's been one of my life missions to sort of understand his true psychology. Because, my Lord, if you read biographies, people who knew him, people. I've talked to many who worked with him personally, very intimately. And when you ask, okay, was this guy crazy? Was he psychotic? Was he on a lot of drugs? Was he completely sane? Hard cold? Con man? What? I've heard so many different variations. It is bananas. It is all said about one person. I've heard he was a cold, ruthless sociopath who knew everything he was doing. I heard he was bipolar, manic depressive, and that you can chart some of his different phases, but that he was primarily manic. I've heard that he was paranoid schizophrenic. I don't believe that at all. I've heard that he was a malignant narcissist, etc. So I've heard 10 million different diagnoses of the same man, and he built so much camouflage around himself, a lot of which was with these different insane biographies, this distortion on who he really was. He was also hiding a lot of his actual beliefs, all these black magic beliefs and his brainwashing techniques that he'd taken from all these different persuasions, belief systems, black magic also being some of them as well. They call it soul cracking, was what father and son used to call it. And so, I mean, a lot of these black magic sort of elements were far more essential to L. Ron's psychology and worldview than I think a lot of people understand. That it's not just theatrics and wearing robes and saying bizarre words and abracadabra, etc. It just gets very dismissed in a lot of bios, and I think it's kind of a shame. I think people are just not understanding how essential that was, and that's what a lot what Junior was pointing out. It's like, no, this mattered a lot more to my dad than I think you understand, because it was about a path of power. Is that you would essentially at its very base level is that I believe that his philosophical worldview was that he was on a path himself of becoming a god, of becoming a high wizard, a magus, to parasitically make people shells to suck out your power to empower yourself, and that was a very almost like a vampiric worldview. And so money obviously is a major factor, but I mean, in terms of what he believed, so he certainly had the cognizance to be incredibly ruthless in protecting his lies and protecting his fabricated biography and coming down violently on anybody that stepped in them. So he had that cognizance. So he was not so lost in fairyland that he didn't have any sense of intense gravity when they were at risk for criminal proceedings, for when money was at risk, when they had people who were about to reveal their secrets. He would flip on a dime and move very quickly to destroy his enemies. He was incredibly ruthless and vindictive. And
he's
so
he killed people.
I would say easily. I mean, easily there are many deaths connected to Scientology. Absolutely. Certainly, of course, a lot of suicides and lots of brains broken and washed and lives destroyed. In terms of actual putting out hits on people, I would not go on record myself. There are other people that would say yes. I don't have a hard evidence, but I haven't looked hard enough on some of these specific claims. In other words, I'm going to leave that as a question mark, and I can't talk more about that on the record, but he was an incredibly dangerous man.
Yeah. And
he was a dangerous man. Scientology is an incredibly dangerous cult. It still is one of the most dangerous cults there is.
So
in my opinion.
Well, I want to wrap up the main episode here, and
sure.
If you don't mind hanging out to talk more about this, I realized I should have just asked you about this from the beginning because there's so many questions about Scientology. But then again, I'm also thinking, you don't want. I don't know. You've talked about this so much already, so
it's a vast subject. So. I mean, it's always hard to encapsulate in terms of, because there's L. Ron, who he was as a human being, me being related to him as a family member, that's the evidence of him being a human being and not this demigod who he portrays himself as.
Yeah.
And the toll that is taken on the damage that it's just has laid out on these tracks throughout all of the generations that I'm still dealing with the echoes and the ricochets with today.
Well, because
That's
you've
one
had
story
you've
on
been
its own.
stalked too by people, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. For years,
And
and
been
they are
raided. Your place has been.
nasty.
I think you told me once that your place was raided or something, or that you came home and it was stuff was everything in disarray or whatever. And
I mean, they've openly stalked me. They've covertly stalked me. They have done really weird, creepy shit in the sidelines and the shadows. I try to have people imagine to really understand kind of how they operate. Is I tell people to imagine the most malignant ex you can think of with a limitless budget. And if someone went to one of your exes that was a big fan of breaking windows and trying to destroy your life, that kind of ex, and said, all right, you got $1 million. How would you destroy this person's life? So they don't overtly just walk up and shoot you in the head. That their whole philosophy is to essentially they want to drive you to suicide, to jail, being institutionalized. They want to destroy you in every way, shape, and form. And that's also why his ruthless and vindictive nature, which is completely woven into the fabric of the entire cult, and they can't change it. It's part of the protocols, and he's it's many millions of times you cannot change a single word of this. They're all running under the same game plan. That's why they're so dangerous, because they are all weapons in the ghost of this dead man. And David Miscavige, who's now the current leader, he is also executing that same game plan, but he's also protecting the same thing as well, which is protecting himself from criminal prosecution, protecting all the money, the millions, billions, the real estate, the members that they still have control over. That's what they're always going to protect.
okay, so look, where can people? Where would you like to promote right now? Or is there anything you want to push?
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, if people want to come to the live show and they're in the Bay Area, the Ruckus Revivals every second Thursday of the month at the Continental Club, and find us at ruckusrevival.com. And if you want to find out more of my different writings, performances, all different kinds of stories, also you can watch The God, the Man. If you want to see some of my family story in a very quick, digestible, entertaining, I hope, performance, then that's on YouTube. Easy to find, The God, the Man, Jamie Dewolf, and it will pop up. That essentially has the distillation of this family story and the kind of emotional toll without getting lost down too many tangents. And I've also done various interviews on the subject as well.
Um, okay, and if you want to carry on with us, we're going to talk more a little bit about
Sure.
this stuff, and then
Yeah, you can always
get back.
edit it however you want later if you want to add in more or whatever.
Oh yeah, yeah. And we'll get back to. I also had some other questions about
Sure.
performance stuff, but anyway, if you want to carry on with us, you can go to patreon.com/poundcast, POUNDCAST. And if you want to watch the show on video, you can go to youtube.com/at Brent Weinbach podcast. And I think that's about it. We're going to go into the extended portion of the show in just a bit.
Okay.
But if not, then we'll see you next week. Thank you again to Jamie Dewolf. And I'm Brent Weinbach. See you next time, or see you in a little bit. Bye-bye.